brainless and evil teenager committed a crime that outraged the entire country. The judge was furious, broke conventions, and publicly named the perpetrator. Who is this killer? How heinous were his crimes? Let's uncover the truth in today's video. In southern Scotland's small town of Aldray, a beautiful and adorable 6-year-old girl named Alesha MacPhail lived. The girl led a peaceful and happy life with her 23-year-old mother, Georgina Lochrain, and her 4-year-old sister, Courtney. Although only 6 years old, the intelligent Alesha was already a second-grade student at the local primary school. Naturally gifted in reading and writing, she enjoyed learning gymnastics and baking cookies in her spare time. People described her as a girl who always smiled and radiated joy, making everyone around her incredibly happy. In mid-June 2018, Alesha's school entered summer vacation, and the girl happily packed her bags to visit her father's house on the Isle of Bute, 100 kilometers away. When Alesha was only 3 months old, her mother, Lochrain, divorced her father, Robert. Despite her mother having custody, Alesha visited her father's house every 2 weeks for the weekend, and Robert cherished his daughter like a precious jewel. Taking advantage of the school break, Alesha expressed her desire to spend more time at her father's house because the area where Robert lived on the Isle of Bute was very safe, with no significant criminal incidents for decades. The bond between father and daughter is vital, so as a mother, Lochrain agreed. On June 28th, Alesha arrived at her father's house, where her grandparents and her father's 17-year-old girlfriend Tony also lived in the same building. The whole family was delighted with the arrival of this little angel and eagerly set aside their tasks. 3 days passed quickly as they played together. On the night of July 1st, after another day of joyful play, the exhausted Alesha fell asleep in her bed while watching the cartoon Peppa Pig on television. Robert gently kissed his daughter's cheek and closed the door to her room. The following day, at 6 o'clock, Alesha's grandfather went to her room to see his granddaughter's sleeping face, but when he opened the door, he froze. The bed in the room was empty. Alesha had disappeared. His shouts woke the other household members, and the entire house was searched, but Alesha was nowhere to be found. They decided to call the police because child disappearances were very rare in the area, and the authorities took it seriously. Many police officers, including helicopters, were immediately mobilized to search the surrounding areas. Soon, the Coast Guard, alerted, found an abandoned hoe and some scattered clothing on a nearby beach, less than 15 minutes from Robert's house. In the early morning hours at 8:54, a Trembling resident called the police because he stumbled upon the remains of a recently demolished hotel during his morning run by the sea. He discovered the naked body of a little girl. Shortly afterward, the police confirmed that it was Alesha, the girl everyone had desperately searched for. A forensic examination later determined that Alesha had been strangled and simultaneously suffocated by having her mouth and nose covered. The depth of her death and the cruelty and harm the girl suffered are evident in the description provided. Due to platform content limitations, we cannot give a detailed account of the crime. However, from a single sentence in the forensic report stating that Alesha's sensory organs sustained catastrophic damage, one can infer just how cruel and despicable the perpetrator must have been. Alesha's tragic death not only left her family in profound grief, but also shocked and outraged the residents of the entire town when the news broke. It is important to note that the Isle of Bute is not large, and its people have always been known for their peaceful and straightforward ways. There had been no significant incidents for decades, so the locals had no sense of caution. As a sign of trust among neighbors, many families would lock their doors at night but leave the keys in the lock, allowing anyone to enter while they slept. This custom posed a challenge for law enforcement in solving the case. Since Alesha's father, Robert, also followed this practice, authorities initially struggled to determine whether the perpetrator was an acquaintance or a stranger committing a random crime. Observing that the perpetrator dared to take the young girl to a place not far from Robert's house before attacking her, it was deduced that he must have been familiar with the surroundings. The police thus concluded that the perpetrator was likely a resident of the Isle of Bute and began investigating those who were familiar with Robert's family. As the investigation continued and police conducted interviews in the area, suspicion gradually fell on a middle-aged woman living nearby who began to suspect her 16-year-old son. A mother's intuition is often accurate, and in this case, Aaron Campbell, born in England in May 2002 when he was just 15 years old, became the focal point of the investigation. Due to his father's job transfer, Aaron moved with his father and a younger sister who was 2 years his junior to Scotland, settling on the Isle of Bute. It is said that his mother, Janet, had problems with alcohol and often physically and mentally abused the children when she was intoxicated. As a result, Aaron's behavior became somewhat peculiar, and he was soon diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. His academic performance suffered greatly, leading to his parents' disappointment and reprimands, further darkening his personality. He was soon diagnosed with depression and exhibited self-harming tendencies. With such a child, Aaron's parents felt powerless and could only allow him to lead a free and relaxed life, often skipping school. Soon, Aaron began socializing with other teenagers facing similar circumstances. They usually kept away from adults when they gathered, drank large amounts of alcohol, and even used white powder. Although the Isle of Bute appeared safe on the outside and its residents seemed content, many local young people felt that the deliberately cultivated tranquility was suffocating them, almost driving them mad. Therefore, they turned to these forms of escapism. Aaron also tried to find his way through hard work. He created his own YouTube channel, hoping to support himself as a content creator someday. But perhaps due to his limited talent, most of Aaron's videos consisted of him talking to the camera, recounting the day's events like a diary, or aimlessly bouncing on a trampoline. His channel only managed to gather a little over 300 subscribers from his efforts. The dream of becoming a successful YouTuber seemed utterly hopeless. This failure only intensified Aaron's already intense and dark personality. Later, many psychologists said that Aaron's personality always tended to self-destruction, that he not only didn't want to live, but also wanted to drag others down with him. He was a particularly malicious type. Since the age of 15, Aaron had told his friends on social media that he planned to do shocking and scandalous things, such as forcing a woman into a physical relationship with him, or even killing someone out of curiosity. Of course, everyone in his circle of friends was always full of complaints and often said exaggerated things. Therefore, his friends did not take him seriously. It was clear that Aaron was serious. One day, he attempted to set a shop on fire and was arrested. But he was only held briefly in a juvenile detention center before being released. After that, Aaron began smoking illegal substances more frequently to help him sleep, and one of the people who sold him illegal substances was Alesha's father, Robert, and his girlfriend, Tony. Aaron even claimed that he had a secret relationship with Tony, cheating on Robert. Many people think that Aaron was bragging. Later, when Aaron's mother discovered that he was using illegal substances, she became furious and punished him severely. Aaron temporarily cut off contact with Robert and Tony after that. Then came the early morning of July 2nd, 2018. The night before, Aaron had another heated argument with his mother. To let off steam, he invited 15 friends to his house to drink and party around 1:30 a.m. These friends had already left and were starting to head home. One of them noticed Aaron lying despondently on his bed in very low spirits. Worried that he might harm himself or do something drastic, the friend wanted to invite him along, but Aaron declined. After the friends departed, Aaron felt his mood sink even further, and the urge to consume illegal substances resurfaced. He began contacting his former suppliers, including Robert, but it was late at night and most people were asleep, so he didn't get any responses. This frustrated Aaron, and he thought about how close Robert's house was, just about 5 minutes away. So he decided to go to Robert's house to see if he could steal some substances. He left the house with a kitchen knife he had grabbed. Soon he arrived at Robert's house. As mentioned before, the locals often left their keys at the door at night, so Aaron entered the house without any obstacles. The first room he entered was the bedroom of Robert's daughter, Alesha, who was sound asleep. Seeing the sleeping girl, Aaron's repressed desires and evil thoughts completely overwhelmed him. He quietly approached, picked up the exhausted girl, and ran out of the room. He hadn't gotten far when the flash of lightning and the cold night wind woke Alesha. Seeing the stranger before her, the girl was not particularly scared, nor did she scream for help. Aaron lied, saying he was the girl's father and Robert's friend was taking her home. He then took the girl to a ruined, deserted inn, ensuring no passers-by were around. Afterward, Aaron showed a sinister smile and attacked Alesha. After committing the crime, Aaron left the kitchen knife on the beach, along with some of his clothes and torn clothes taken from the girl. He threw them all into the sea, thinking this would eliminate all evidence. He didn't know that these clothes would be washed ashore and discovered by the Coast Guard. After completing all this, he returned home as if nothing had happened, took a shower, and realized he had left his phone at the crime scene. So he went back to the crime scene to look for the phone. When he found the phone and returned home, it was already 4 a.m. His mother, Janet, was anxiously waiting for him. Shortly after Aaron had left the house for the second time, Janet noticed that her son was not in his room. She checked the footage from the security camera at the front door and saw Aaron leaving with a knife. Given their argument the previous night, she feared that Aaron might do something reckless, so she called the police. Fortunately, just after hanging up, Aaron returned home. Janet quickly called the police back to cancel the report. She then began questioning Aaron about where he had gone late at night. He casually replied that he didn't know what he had done, probably went out to look for his phone and then fell asleep. Several hours later, the news of the disappearance of the girl Alesha spread, and a large number of police officers began gathering in the surrounding areas for a thorough search. When Alesha's father, Robert, saw the missed call from Aaron on his phone from the previous night, he called Aaron and asked if he had seen his daughter. Aaron naturally denied it immediately. He said that maybe Alesha couldn't have gone very far. At that moment, Robert thought it was just a comforting comment from Aaron. But later, it seemed like a taunt and mockery directed at the victim's family. From this, we can see how dark Aaron's inner world was. Subsequently, as we mentioned earlier, a jogger discovered Alesha's body. The authorities officially launched an investigation into this heinous case. Soon, they noticed Janet's call to report that her son had left the house alone in the early hours around Alesha's disappearance. They contacted her to gather more information. At this point, Janet began to have suspicions about her son. She tentatively asked Aaron if he knew anything about Alesha's disappearance, but Aaron firmly denied any involvement each time. Later, Janet also hinted to Aaron that the police had advanced DNA technology to solve cases. If the killer had any connection to the victim, the person's DNA would definitely be found. Aaron remained confident despite his mother's words, claiming that his DNA couldn't be found since he had never had contact with Alesha. However, Aaron's defense was simply bluster. Later, the police found on his computer that immediately after his mother left, he started searching online for keywords like how the police find DNA and principles of DNA. Clearly, the more he learned, the more uneasy he became. Aaron's mother remained unaware of her son's inner turmoil. After hearing his firm denials, she began to think that she was being paranoid. She remained oblivious to the changes within him. He began cooperating with the police investigation. To appear innocent, he provided the police with surveillance footage showing him leaving his home twice in the early morning hours. The investigators then began to wonder what he had been doing during those 2 occasions when he left his house that night. He responded with complete cooperation, casually explaining that he went out to buy illegal substances and then went out again to look for his lost phone after realizing it was missing. However, he could not provide any contact details for the dealer from that night to corroborate his story. After gathering the clues they had, the police found a surprising overlap between the time he left the house in the early morning and the time of the crime. He also knew the victim's father, Robert, having been to Robert's house before to buy illegal substances, so he was pretty familiar with the surroundings. As a result, Aaron became the prime suspect. 2 days after the crime, on July 4th, 2018, he was arrested and charged with rape and murder. During the investigation and the trial that followed, Aaron mostly remained silent or refused to answer the questions posed by the authorities. The prosecution against Aaron officially began in February 2019. Since he was only 16 years old at the time as a minor, the judge prohibited the media from disclosing his name to the public. During the court proceedings, the prosecution presented substantial evidence to the jury. This included the surveillance footage provided by Aaron's mother, showing him leaving the house twice around the time of the crime, the clothing found near Alesha's body on the beach, and a hoe that Janet identified as belonging to their home. The clothes in the kitchen also belonged to Aaron. Additionally, a camera near the beach captured footage at 2:25 a.m., showing a figure resembling Aaron carrying something along the coast. During the forensic examination of the victim's body, it was noted that her bare feet were immaculate, suggesting that she had been carried to the crime scene, which matched the footage. However, the most compelling evidence for the police was the DNA. They found Aaron's DNA traces in 14 different locations on the victim's body. Despite this strong evidence, Aaron's lawyer defended him as innocent. According to Aaron, the actual perpetrator of Alesha's murder was Tony, Alesha's father's girlfriend. He claimed that Tony was jealous and wanted to monopolize Robert's love, which led her to harm Alesha. Regarding Aaron's DNA found on Alesha, he explained that Tony had seduced him in the garage on the night of the incident. Aaron speculated that Tony must have used a condom at that time, leaving traces of his DNA, which Tony then spread at the crime scene to frame him. But this defense was considered far-fetched and completely unconvincing from any perspective. Furthermore, Alesha's grandparents and her father, Robert, unanimously testified about Tony and Alesha's close and harmonious relationship. They described Tony as someone who looked after Alesha as if she were his own sister. Ironically, despite Aaron's absurd defense, the media reported on it extensively. Since the court prohibited the public disclosure of Aaron's name and identity, the press published Tony's photos and name instead, leading to confusion among many uninformed people. Once Tony was wrongly identified as the perpetrator, the trial proceeded quickly, lasting 9 days. Faced with the overwhelming evidence presented by the prosecution, the jury deliberated for only 3 hours before declaring Aaron guilty. A month later, the court sentenced Aaron to life in prison, with a minimum term of 27 years before parole could be considered. During sentencing, the judge expressed anger, labeling it as one of the most atrocious crimes he had seen in his long career on the bench. Aaron was undoubtedly portrayed as an insensitive, cunning, and dangerous individual. If it weren't for his age of 16 and the slight possibility of rehabilitation, the judge hinted that Aaron would have received a harsher sentence. Moreover, due to the exceptionally grave nature of the case, the judge decided to lift the media restrictions, allowing Aaron's name to be reported publicly. This marked a milestone in Scottish judicial history. Throughout the sentencing, Aaron remained impassive. Later, he confessed to a social worker that since the court found him guilty, he saw no point in pretending anymore. He admitted to killing Alesha and reveled in repeatedly recalling his crime in his mind, feeling satisfied. He expressed a desire to commit the crime again if given the opportunity. Additionally, Aaron boasted about how he had suppressed laughter throughout the trial, indicating that he had made a conscious effort not to laugh in the courtroom. Naturally, Alesha's family was dissatisfied with the verdict. They believed the sentence, which allowed for parole after 27 years, was too lenient for a life sentence. Alesha's mother expressed her sadness to the media, stating that if it was a life sentence, then Aaron should remain incarcerated until his death. She questioned why the rights of a beastly individual like him were being considered. 6 months later, when Aaron appealed his conviction, the court decided to reduce his minimum prison term from 27 years to 23 years, meaning Aaron would be eligible for parole at 40. Initially, Aaron was incarcerated in a juvenile detention center, but upon turning 21, he would be transferred to an adult facility. Following media coverage, this case immediately attracted attention in Scotland and the UK. Many considered it one of the most atrocious crimes known in recent years. Aaron became one of the most reviled and hated individuals in British society. Fortunately, prisons have their own set of rules, and offenders like Aaron are destined to occupy the lowest rung, even within the prison walls, often subjected to various forms of abuse by other inmates. Perhaps realizing this, credible sources indicate that Aaron changed his arrogant attitude upon entering prison. He was confined to his solitary cell, too fearful to go out. Aware of the risks, the prison authorities assigned guards nearby to ensure his safety. However, in June 2021, whether intentionally or through negligence, a guard forgot to lock the door to Aaron's cell after the lunch hour. Seizing the opportunity, a physically robust inmate broke into Aaron's cell and brutally attacked him, knocking him to the ground and mercilessly beating him. Unable to defend himself, Aaron collapsed like a rag doll, enduring the relentless assault. The beating continued for some time until he was discovered. Several guards intervened and separated the attacker from Aaron. He was then rushed to the hospital, suffering severe injuries, with reports indicating that several teeth were embedded in his lip. The inmate who assaulted him would undoubtedly face charges of assault. However, he seemed utterly indifferent. Other inmates in the prison regarded him as a hero. Rumors circulated that even the guards privately acknowledged that Aaron got what he deserved. Given that the prison authorities maintained this stance, it is safe to assume that better treatment awaits Aaron in the coming days. As for Aaron's parents, they completely severed ties with him after the incident and hastily moved away from the Isle of Bute. Initially, they tried to sell their house. Still, no workers were willing to make the necessary repairs, and no real estate agents were willing to represent the property where Aaron once resided. Consequently, the house was left abandoned. Thus, justice is finally served. By now, I'm sure you understand why the judge made such a decision. Pray that Alesha's family, especially her mother, remains safe. Jennifer was a loving mother who lived peacefully as a housewife. However, after discovering something seemingly harmless, she and her daughter ultimately paid with their lives. What exactly did Jennifer discover, and who would go to such lengths to harm this mother and daughter? Let's delve into this mystery. Hello, everyone. I am Crime X7. Today's case takes us to Grand Junction, Colorado. This city is located in western Colorado near the Utah border, with a population of about 46,000. It is the county seat of Mesa County and the 15th largest city in Colorado. The protagonist, Jennifer, was born in Oklahoma in 1967. She had a tumultuous upbringing, experiencing her parents' divorce at a young age and physical abuse by an older man in her teenage years. These unfortunate events caused severe psychological trauma to Jennifer and had a profound impact on her future life. Perhaps to overcome her psychological scars, Jennifer later embraced Christianity. She held herself to high standards, embodying the behaviors and morals expected of a devout Christian. In 1986, at 19, Jennifer went to California for her studies. 4 years later, in 1990, Jennifer met her future husband, Michael, through a friend. Born in 1963, Michael was 4 years older than Jennifer and worked as a helicopter pilot at the San Diego Naval Base. People say that Jennifer fell in love with Michael at first sight. Apart from liking Michael's outgoing and cheerful personality, Jennifer particularly felt drawn to the fact that Michael was also a devout Christian. To Jennifer, sharing the same faith meant having similar life values. Her unfortunate experiences during her teenage years had left her with a fear of most men, so having a shared faith subtly labeled Michael as a reasonable person in her eyes. Through their friends' matchmaking, they gradually developed into a couple. In 1993, after 3 years of dating, Michael left the military. They married and moved to Simpsonville in northern South Carolina that same year. The choice of this city was partly for Michael's job and their faith, as North South Carolina is part of the Bible Belt. In this region, evangelical Christianity is predominant. Jennifer and Michael lived in this city for a long time and had a daughter, Abby, in 1995. At first, their lives were harmonious, but Michael's dominant nature began to surface as time passed. He started imposing various restrictions on Jennifer, from her clothing choices and hairstyles to her social circle and activities, which required his approval. His strong desire for marital intimacy often led to unusual demands, which Jennifer, with her traditional mindset, found unbearable. These issues, though not leading to major conflicts, created a palpable tension in their relationship. It was in the year 2000 that their story took a significant turn. Michael received a promising job offer from a manufacturing company in Colorado, a move that would not only change their physical location, but potentially reshape their relationship. They invited him to serve as a department manager. Consequently, the family moved from North Carolina to Grand Junction, Colorado. Initially, this seemed like a normal transition, but it unexpectedly led to significant problems. Jennifer, being somewhat introverted, had difficulty adapting to the new environment. After the move, she almost completely isolated herself. As the saying goes, an idle mind is the devil's workshop. Less than a year after moving, Jennifer unintentionally discovered something that triggered a chain of events, ultimately leading to the deaths of her and her daughter. On November 11, 2001, around 4 p.m., Michael made a distress call to the local police, indicating that someone might have broken into their home and that his wife, Jennifer, and daughter, Abby, were missing.
911, where's your emergency?
Oh my God, it's in my house.
Okay, what's going on?
I just got home from work and there's blood all over the bed and there's stuff all over the floor. My family's gone, my daughter and my wife aren't here.
Upon receiving the call, the police quickly arrived at the scene. As Michael described, he found various items scattered around the house, and he noticed a significant amount of blood on the master bed. With Jennifer and Abby missing, the police initially suspected a robbery that escalated into a kidnapping. However, upon further investigation, they quickly found several inconsistencies. First, there was a large amount of blood on the master bed. Considering the volume and location of the blood, it was evident that an intruder must have attacked Jennifer while she was resting on the bed. Strangely, however, there were no blood splatters on the wall near the headboard, and the carpet was spotless, showing no signs of dragging or bloodstains. If Jennifer had been attacked in the bedroom and then forcibly taken away, the scene wouldn't look like this. Additionally, the police found a small amount of blood in Jennifer's car, mainly on the back seat and the front driver's seat. This led the police to believe the intruder might have used the vehicle to transport Jennifer and her daughter to another location. However, this raised another question. Why was the car still parked at the house? This point was highly suspicious. Given these findings, the police first questioned the caller, Michael. According to Michael, around 6 a.m. that morning, he said goodbye to his wife and daughter as usual and went to work. During the day, he called home 3 times, at 7 a.m., 11 a.m., and 2 p.m., but Jennifer did not answer any of the calls, which was unusual. Feeling something was off, Michael left work early at 4 p.m. and returned home, only to find the house in disarray and Jennifer and Abby missing. Michael said he had no idea what might have happened to the mother and daughter or who could have harmed them. They had just moved in recently and hadn't offended anyone. Although the police couldn't get valuable clues from Michael or resolve the various inconsistencies, they prioritized taking immediate action to find the missing Jennifer and Abby. The police organized a group of volunteers and thoroughly searched the area surrounding Michael's home. As a husband and father, Michael tried every possible way to help. Besides actively cooperating with the police, Michael and Jennifer's parents publicly appealed to the media. This extensive search effort lasted 3 days, with the police and hundreds of volunteers combing several kilometers around the area. However, they still found no trace of Jennifer and Abby. Under these circumstances, the police decided to address the previously discovered issues before proceeding with the next steps. They tested the blood and fingerprints collected from the scene. The results indicated that the blood on the bed and in the car belonged to the missing Jennifer, and the fingerprints all came from family members. This suggested that the intruder had prepared thoroughly, leaving no biological evidence, and had used Jennifer's car to move the mother and daughter to another location. The police interviewed the neighbors to explain why the car was still at the house and why there were no bloodstains elsewhere in the home. They found a possible answer. According to a neighbor who lived next door on November 13th, the day Michael reported the disappearance, Jennifer's car had not left the premises, nor were there any unusual noises from their home. This suggested that Jennifer and Abby might have gone missing the day before the report or earlier. Michael naturally became the prime suspect as the one who reported the disappearance. Michael had claimed that Jennifer and Abby disappeared on the day he made the report, and he also had the opportunity to commit the crime and then return the car to its original location. The police returned to inspect the couple's belongings to understand Michael's motive. This time, they made a significant discovery. In a blank space in a religious book, they found a note written by Jennifer before she went missing. Besides expressing her admiration for Pastor Stanley, Jennifer mentioned having had a conflict with Michael on Friday. Additionally, the police found an apology email on Michael's computer and a large amount of explicit content. Based on these findings, the police believed the explicit content might have triggered the conflict. In the apology email, Michael mentioned feeling sorry for allowing the devil a foothold, a phrase that, though vague, was significant given their devout Christian beliefs. Most Christian denominations emphasize purity and self-control, viewing the consumption of such content as a trigger for lust and a violation of Christian doctrines and values. Therefore, the police deduced that the devil Michael referred to was the explicit content on his computer. They then questioned Michael again. According to Michael, Jennifer was not opposed to watching such films. On the contrary, she wanted to learn some practical knowledge from them. Since Jennifer had undergone a hysterectomy, she had lost interest in traditional marital intimacy, so they needed to find an alternative way to satisfy each other's needs. This explained the presence of explicit content on Michael's computer. The police, in their professional capacity, were understandably skeptical of Michael's explanation. The types of films on his computer were beyond what an average person could tolerate, and the sheer volume was staggering. People did not download the films for educational purposes, but to satisfy personal, unusual preferences. However, despite their suspicions, the police maintained a cautious stance, refraining from definitively concluding that Michael would harm his wife and daughter over this matter. The police, to find more clues, later contacted Jennifer's friends back in her hometown. They uncovered more information about the couple's discord. The friends said Michael was very oppressive, taking control of all aspects of their life together. Jennifer, on the other hand, was gentle and quite traditional. Whenever conflicts arose, Jennifer typically conceded. This dynamic led to ongoing issues in their marriage. Maintaining this unequal relationship for a long time initially did not affect their feelings for each other, because Jennifer lived in a familiar environment and had friends for support. However, after moving, Jennifer's attitude changed significantly. She began to resist Michael and recently planned to take her daughter and live elsewhere for a while. Although her friends were unsure of what had transpired since the move, they believed that Jennifer's actions might be a sign she was preparing to leave Michael. Given Michael's domineering personality, her friends suspected he might be involved in the disappearance. The friends' statements gave the police a clear direction for their investigation and made them realize that Jennifer and Abby might already be dead. In such a situation, continuing aimless searches seemed futile. Therefore, the police decided to monitor Michael secretly. While they hoped to find clues this way, they unexpectedly uncovered another side of Michael. Despite his six-figure income, he was a kleptomaniac. He not only received a salary from his company, but also frequently stole company property. Undercover officers documented all these actions. With sufficient evidence of his thefts, the police interrogated Michael again. This time, Michael was noticeably more cooperative. He not only admitted to his addiction to pornography and robbery, but also shared many details about their family life. Seeing Michael start to crack, the police seized the opportunity to press him for information about Jennifer and Abby. Initially resistant, Michael couldn't withstand the prolonged questioning. Eventually, he broke down, telling the police that he needed to go home and rest before revealing the truth. The police, taking his word, agreed and almost fell into his trap. The next day, as agreed, the police went to Michael's residence. They planned to bring Michael to the station and recover the stolen items. However, to their surprise, they found that Michael had taken matters into his own hands at home. When discovered, Michael was in a state of semi-consciousness, lying naked in the bathtub with a cut on his left wrist. Beside the tub were a Bible and a note stating that he was not involved in the case, but felt forced to prove his innocence in this extreme manner because the police didn't believe him. The police, seeing this scene, admitted to feeling a sense of panic. If Michael had indeed been wronged and lost his life, they would face significant social pressure and legal consequences. Fortunately, Michael survived, and the police quickly saw through his ploy. Medical professionals later confirmed that Michael's injuries were not severe and did not pose a life-threatening risk. Considering Michael's actions, just before the scheduled meeting with the police, it became evident that Michael's self-harm was merely an attempt to evade suspicion. Additionally, the police received a crucial clue from Michael's co-workers while returning the stolen items. According to one co-worker, Michael disposed of numerous large and heavy items in the company's dumpster on the morning of the reported disappearance, which seemed markedly different from the usual waste. This statement caught the attention of the police, leading them to suspect that Michael might have discarded Jennifer and Abby's bodies. However, this revelation came 6 months after the incident, and the trash Michael disposed of had likely been cleared out, posing a significant challenge to the ongoing investigation. Nevertheless, the police persisted and, using garbage disposal records, identified the trash Michael had discarded and tracked it to a landfill. Over the next several weeks, the police thoroughly searched over 100 acres of the landfill. After days of arduous work, their efforts paid off when they discovered Jennifer's partially decomposed body. Subsequent autopsy results confirmed Jennifer's death as a homicide, caused by a gunshot wound to the head. Meanwhile, the search for Abby's body continued. Initially, the police believed that Abby's body might also be in the same landfill. However, over the following month, they sifted through over 4,000 tons of trash, but failed to locate her remains. After searching almost the entire landfill, Abby's body was still not found. Ultimately, the police had to stop the search. An officer said, "No one wants to leave a 6-year-old girl buried in a landfill. But in the end, we had to do it. Knowing we had left Abby there, we achieved our goal and left that dump. Abby is probably in a better place, and I know she forgives us for leaving her there. But I also know she knows we tried our best." In June 2002, 7 months after the incident, Michael was arrested for murder. Although he never admitted to the crime, police believe that it was mainly due to his use of unhealthy content. Jennifer, being a devout Christian, could not accept Michael's indulgence in such content, especially given the traumatic experiences of her youth. Disagreement over Michael's habits could lead to conflict between them. While the specifics of what happened after their altercation are unknown, Michael's apology email suggests that Jennifer plans to leave him with Abby. When Michael's attempts at reconciliation failed and he felt the marriage was no longer repairable, he harbored murderous intentions. The exact reason for Abby's involvement remains unclear. However, it is possible that Abby accidentally witnessed Michael's criminal actions, or that Michael also sought to divert attention by eliminating her. In March 2004, 2 years after the incident, they brought the case to trial. Because they did not find Abby's body, the prosecution could not bring 2 murder charges against Michael. He was eventually convicted of 1 count of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Although authorities believe Abby is dead, they have not discovered her body. However, they have released a mock-up image of how Abby will look as an adult. Abby was only 6 years old at the time of the incident, so if she were alive today, she would be 29 years old. The tragic story of Jennifer and Abby highlights the importance of open and respectful communication in relationships. Michael's obsession and inability to resolve conflicts lead to a devastating tragedy. Early intervention and proper counseling can prevent this fatal outcome. We all have a responsibility to care for and protect our loved ones. A tragic accident caused a baby who was about to begin enjoying a beautiful life to disappear from the world forever. The subsequent investigation into this incident shocked everyone. Even 40 years later, Australians remain divided on the truth of this tragedy, with opinions split down the middle and no one able to convince the other. This is the case of the death of baby Azaria Chamberlain. A vast, flat, and arid wilderness lies in the central part of the Australian continent. A striking red hill rising 348 meters above the ground, formed from a single massive sandstone rock, stands in the heart of this endless expanse. This is the world-famous Uluru, also known as Ayers Rock, and it is a sacred site to the local Aboriginal people. Legends as chilling and blood-soaked as its crimson hue steep the origin of Uluru. One legend tells of a great battle in ancient times between a god and a demon king who sought to destroy the world. As they fought, their blood mingled, and a single drop fell to the ground, forming Uluru. Even in the dead of night, you can hear the sounds of their clashing swords from within the mountain, evidence that their blood still battles inside. Another legend suggests a brutal war between ancestral tribes of the local Aboriginal people took place here, spilling so much blood that it soaked into the earth. In her grief, the earth goddess caused the blood-stained ground to rise, forming this mountain. Due to these bloody legends, Uluru is revered as a sacred site by the Aboriginal people and feared as a cursed mountain. Anyone who dares to take even a small rock from Uluru will suffer from bad luck. But human curiosity is innate. Every year, a large number of tourists still come to witness the beauty of Uluru. On August 17, 1980, the Chamberlain family brought their 3 children to a campsite at the foot of Uluru, planning to spend a leisurely vacation there. The husband, Michael Chamberlain, was a writer and pastor of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. The wife, Lindy Chamberlain, was a full-time mother dedicated to caring for their 2 young sons and their 9-week-old baby daughter, Azaria Chamberlain. After setting up their tent and greeting the other campers, the Chamberlain family noticed that, besides the other tourists, there were also many Australian wild dogs, known locally as dingoes, surrounding the campsite. These canines resemble domestic dogs, with a very subtle relationship with humans. They are semi-domesticated and semi-wild. When willing to be fed and kept, they can quickly behave like loyal pets. However, once released into the wild, they can rapidly become feral, capable of hunting small animals alone or in packs. Because dingoes look very much like dogs, and there were no known cases of dingoes actively attacking humans, the tourists did not feel threatened by these quiet animals that wandered around the campsite, ready to scavenge their leftovers. The tourists would occasionally throw them uneaten meat and bones. On the evening of August 17, 1980, someone lit a bonfire in the center of the campsite. The tourists sat around it, happily chatting about their life experiences and travel stories. Among them were the Chamberlain couple and their 2 sons, while the 9-week-old baby Azaria was placed by the mother, Lindy, in a tent a few meters away. The baby was sleeping soundly. During this time, Lindy would periodically return to the tent to check on her daughter. Soon it was past 10 p.m. After confirming that her daughter was fine, Lindy returned to sit beside the tent, chatting and joking with a newly acquainted female nurse while opening a can of beans to feed her son. At that moment, the sharp cry of a child was heard in the distance, seemingly coming from the direction of their tent. Lindy's face instantly changed. She quickly stood up and ran towards their tent. She later recalled that as she approached the tent, she saw a wild dog dart out and disappear into the night. She rushed into the tent to check, but after searching every corner, she couldn't find her daughter, Azaria, who had been sleeping soundly moments before. Terror and despair overwhelmed her as she shouted that a dingo had taken her baby. She ran back to the center of the campsite to seek help from the others. This terrifying news immediately shattered the previously cheerful atmosphere of the campsite. The tourists quickly organized themselves, contacting the police for assistance and anxiously searching the area around the campsite. Unfortunately, after a night of searching, Azaria was still missing, as if the baby had vanished into thin air. The next day, even with the help of a professional search and rescue team organized by the police, there were no discoveries. A week later, searchers found Azaria's baby jumpsuit 4 kilometers away from the campsite. A significant amount of blood stained the neckline and chest area of the garment. Based on this evidence, even though they had not found the baby's body, the police concluded that she was most likely deceased. The next step was to determine how to classify this tragedy. According to the baby's mother, this was undoubtedly a tragic accident caused by a wild animal attack. However, the police believed the situation was not that simple. At the time, people commonly believed that dingoes were afraid of humans, and no records existed of dingoes attacking people or causing severe harm. When the police initially questioned Lindy, she stated that she only saw the back of a wild dog running out of the tent. She could not clearly see if it had a baby in its mouth. Therefore, the police thought asserting that a dingo caused this tragedy was far-fetched. Furthermore, the Chamberlain couple's reactions raised suspicions. After this incident, which shocked the entire Northern Territory and all of Australia, their responses during police interrogations and media interviews were very restrained and calm. Today, we understand that different people react differently to immense grief and trauma. Some people may appear calm on the surface while experiencing deep internal pain. They were evidently such exceptions. But to the Northern Territory police at the time, the family Chamberlain's lack of tearful and visibly devastated reactions seemed highly suspicious. They believed the couple was hiding something. Soon, without any evidence, the investigating officers reached a consensus. They concluded that baby Azaria was indeed dead, but she was not killed by a wild dog. Instead, they believed she was killed by her own mother, Lindy, with her father, at least considered an accomplice. The truth at the Northern Territory coroner's report soon disappointed the police. After analyzing the blood-stained jumpsuit, the coroner concluded that a dingo likely killed the child. The basis for this conclusion, however, was unclear. At the end of the coroner's report, it was additionally noted that after the child was bitten to death by dingoes, the baby's body must have been taken away and intentionally concealed by someone or several people. Such a report naturally pleased neither side, especially the police. Therefore, they persistently launched an investigation into the Chamberlain couple. Firstly, they brought in a renowned British forensic expert named James to examine the blood-stained baby jumpsuit. After a thorough analysis, James confidently stated that the damages to the clothing were not caused by dingo bites, but rather appeared to have been inflicted by scissors or a knife. Furthermore, he found no traces of dingo saliva residue on the garment, further supporting the notion that dingoes had not attacked the baby. Shortly after, the police brought James some animal hairs found in the Chamberlain's tent. After a brief examination, James definitively identified them as cat hairs. The police were convinced they had thoroughly debunked Lindy's lies. The next step was to determine how she had killed her daughter. The police quickly turned their attention to their car. After almost dismantling the vehicle and conducting a comprehensive inspection, police witnesses found a snow dome-like mark next to the front passenger seat, bloodstains under the front passenger seat's carpet, and significant blood residue underneath the front storage box. Moreover, this was not just any blood residue, but hemoglobin from infant blood, a component found only in the blood of infants from birth to 6 months old. This further proved that Azaria was not inside the tent. Instead of being taken and killed by dingoes, Azaria died in their family car. Based on this evidence, the police immediately arrested the baby's parents, and Lindy was charged with first-degree murder. This news shocked Australia again, as the police seemed confident in their case, leading most Australians to believe Lindy was guilty. Then, despite not having the conveniences we have today, some busybodies began a witch hunt against the Chamberlain family. Upon discovering that Michael was a follower of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, a relatively niche Christian denomination, some people speculated about cult sacrifices. They even called the police, claiming that the name Azaria meant sacrifice in the wilderness in the church, and thus became Lindy's motive for killing the child. They painted her as a witch. However, the name Azaria means helped by God. But even if someone tried to explain in that charged atmosphere, it's unlikely they would have listened. So, under this almost unanimous sentiment, the trial began at the end of 1982, 2 years after the tragedy. Lindy was pregnant again and sat in the dock with a big belly. In court, the prosecution painted a terrifying and gruesome scene to the jury. On the night of August 17, 1980, during Lindy's final visit to the tent under the pretext of checking on her daughter, she took the baby out and got into the parked car nearby. In the passenger seat, she brutally murdered her daughter and stuffed her into a piece of luggage. Then she returned to the bonfire, claiming minutes later that she heard the child cry. After returning to the tent, Lindy pretended to discover that dingoes had taken her daughter and began screaming for help. Seizing the opportunity amidst the confusion, her husband Michael took the child's body out of the camp and buried it in a concealed location. Then he threw the child's bloodied clothes far away to create the illusion of a dingo attack. Unfortunately, the knife marks on the clothes and the absence of dingo saliva proved they were lying. Facing these allegations from the police, Lindy's defense lawyer argued logically that all the evidence the police had was circumstantial. If they claimed Azaria was murdered by her parents, then what was the motive, and where was the murder weapon? According to the police's theory, the perpetrator had to commit these heinous acts within just 10 minutes, less than 10 meters away from the bonfire, without anyone noticing. Then she appeared without a drop of blood, calmly returned to the bonfire, and continued feeding her son canned food. Even the most cold-blooded killers would find it difficult to achieve such a feat. A forensic expert hired by the defense also pointed out that the reagent used by the police to detect blood residue was unreliable. Besides infant hemoglobin, it could react similarly to many other chemicals, so it couldn't conclusively prove that the blood found in the car was Azaria's. As for the absence of dingo saliva on the child's clothes, Lindy explained that when the child disappeared, she was also wearing a cardigan over the jumpsuit, and dingoes bit into the cardigan, not the jumpsuit. But despite the 2 years between the incident and the trial, the police had failed to find this cardigan in the vicinity. So they were adamant that Lindy was lying and that the cardigan never existed. In short, after several rounds of heated debates, her fate was left in the hands of the jury. According to one of the jurors, recalling years later, they didn't find the evidence held by the police particularly convincing. In the initial vote, some jurors insisted Lindy was guilty, some believed she was innocent, and some had no opinion. Before the trial, the media mainly had portrayed Lindy as a quirky and cold-hearted witch. These reports more or less influenced all the jurors. So, in the end, they reluctantly reached a consensus and convicted her. When the judge announced the verdict, several jurors felt guilty and couldn't even look Lindy in the eye. The court ultimately found her guilty of murder, sentencing her to life imprisonment. Her husband, Michael, was considered an accessory for concealing the body afterward and was sentenced to 18 months probation. Shortly after entering prison, Lindy gave birth to their fourth child, who was immediately taken from the prison and placed in the care of her husband, who was busy preparing a defense for his wife. For Michael, he was confident he could clear his wife's name, because throughout the case there were too many crucial defense witnesses and evidence deliberately excluded by the police from the trial. Firstly, there were the tourists who were at the campsite with them on the day of the incident. They, as eyewitnesses, almost all stood in support of the Chamberlain family. On the night of the incident, a nurse chatting with Lindy by the bonfire also recounted her calm demeanor and lack of distress. At the first opportunity, she informed the police that she had indeed heard the baby's cries coming from the tent with Lindy. Subsequently, the police grilled on this issue for several hours, trying to get her to admit that she misheard. But the nurse insisted that she heard it himself. Later, her testimony was excluded from the trial. Additionally, on the day of the tragedy at the campsite, there was a tourist named Marie Happy, an amateur hunter who enjoyed tracking animals. On the evening of the incident, he noticed two particularly hungry-looking wild dogs roaming the campsite. As they approached, Marie took out his camera and snapped a photo. A few dozen minutes later, screams were heard from the campsite, claiming that wild dogs had taken the child. So Marie believed there was a high probability that the two wild dogs he had previously photographed were involved. Later, as an amateur tracker, he examined the area around the campsite and found the deep tracks of a wild dog, noticeably deeper than those of similar tracks nearby. Next to the tracks, there were intermittent traces of blood droplets, indicating that the wild dog was carrying something relatively heavy and bleeding. After leaving the campsite for some distance, there was a small indentation next to the tracks, as if the animal had put down whatever it was carrying to rest for a while before picking it up again and running into a thicket. The tracks disappeared. At the time, the wild dog was carrying only the missing child, Azaria. Marie's discovery was later confirmed by a local indigenous hunter, an experienced tracker, the following day. However, these testimonies were selectively excluded by the police and did not appear in the trial. Furthermore, many local residents also expressed that Australian wild dogs are opportunistic predators. They may not attack humans, especially large adults, but they are wary. When extremely hungry, they may attack children. Before Azaria's case, such incidents might not have been attributed to wild dogs, or perhaps children were fortunate enough to be discovered and rescued by adults before serious harm occurred. Thus, no such incidents were reported. But these explanations were also suppressed by the police. Now, let's talk about the so-called British forensic expert James, whom the police brought in. Although he had extensive industry experience, his career was tainted. 8 years before the tragedy, in a case of heinous murder in Britain, he made erroneous judgments about the cause of death, resulting in 3 innocent young people spending several years wrongfully imprisoned. Can such a person's conclusion about the baby's clothes not being torn by wild dogs and the conclusion that the residue in the tent was cat fur be trusted? In fact, shortly after this case and related evidence were reported, an Australian canid researcher proactively contacted the police, offering to evaluate the evidence. The police refused, citing that the evaluation work had already been completed. It wasn't until after Lindy's conviction that this expert had the opportunity to examine the evidence. He immediately recognized the damage caused by wild dog bites on the clothes and confirmed that the material in the plastic bag labeled as cat fur by the police was actually dog fur. Subsequently, a journalist who had always believed in Lindy's innocence discovered that the police had entrusted evidence collection and testing in this case to a newcomer who had only been in the field for 3 months and had no prior experience handling major cases. Are the identification results he made reliable? For example, those considered by the police as the strongest evidence presented in court, the so-called reaction of infant blood protein found in the car, were found to be highly unreliable after further analysis by more experts and individuals familiar with cars. They discovered that the reagent used by the police was extremely unreliable. The so-called blood residue was just a type of soundproofing agent sprayed inside the car body during manufacturing, which could react chemically with the reagent. As for the blood spots on the door handle, they were just paint splattered accidentally during the car manufacturing process. In 1983, Linda's lawyer filed an appeal with the federal court, which was not accepted. It wasn't until the lawyer took the case to the Supreme Court that they managed to secure an appeal. Quickly, they submitted all the testimonies from the mentioned witnesses and various pieces of evidence, which provided a strong rebuttal against the prosecution's key evidence. However, possibly due to the deep-seated prejudice against Lindy, this appeal was quickly rejected, plunging everyone into deep despair. Perhaps, just like the legend of Uluru, always shrouded in a bloody atmosphere, the tragic events that unfolded beneath it ultimately revealed the truth through one person's blood. In 1986, a British tourist named David Bride accidentally fell from the top of Uluru while climbing it at night. His body was only found after 8 days, and it was already incomplete because wild dog dens surrounded the area where he fell. People began to suspect that a part of his remains might have been torn off and eaten by wild dogs. To gather his bones as much as possible, the police once again joined forces with some local volunteers to form a human chain and search the tall grass. Among them, a rescuer named John Busy, while passing through a patch of grass, saw a small garment hanging there, covered in bloodstains. His heart immediately raced because he was the only one present that day who had participated in the search for the missing girl Azaria 6 years ago nearby. He had been following this case all along. He remembered Lindy describing the characteristics of the outermost cardigan her daughter was wearing when she disappeared in court. But the police had never found that garment, so they concluded she was lying. And now this garment that appeared before him perfectly matched all her descriptions. So he immediately followed standard procedure, preserved the garment, and reported to his superiors. This little cardigan could be seen as proof of her innocence, the final crucial piece of the puzzle. On the day they received the news, the Chief Minister of the Northern Territory issued an immediate order to release Lindy. 2 years later, on September 15, 1988, the Northern Territory Court of Appeal unanimously overturned all convictions against Lindy and Michael. As a result, they received a compensation of 1,300 Australian dollars. This amount is said to be less than 1/3 of what the couple spent on litigation over the years. This case has also been cited in subsequent legal textbooks as a typical example of media misinformation and societal prejudice adversely affecting fair trials. Despite all this, for reasons unknown, in the third coroner's report released in 1995 concerning this case, Azaria's cause of death was still determined as unknown. It wasn't until over 30 years after the tragedy, in 2012, when the chief coroner of the Northern Territory at the time officially determined in the fourth report that Azaria's cause of death was due to a wild dog attack and abduction. He issued a new death certificate and apologized to Lindy for the delayed outcome. However, perhaps influenced by the overwhelming misinformation at the time, it is said that even today, over 40% of Australians still believe Lindy is guilty. Despite not having enough concrete evidence, Lindy and Michael were wrongly convicted. This story emphasizes caution in considering all evidence and possibilities before concluding. It also highlights the importance of integrity and objectivity in the investigation and trial process to ensure that justice is fully done. Finally, the Chamberlain family case is a significant reminder of each individual's right to a fair trial and the need to overcome all outside influences and prejudices to achieve fairness and justice.